Welcome inside Appalachia. I'm Mason Adams. This week, we take a look back at a shocking crime near the Appalachian Trail and speak to the author of a book that re-examines the case.
It became actually the first official federal hate crime in the United States.
We also sample a beloved Lenten staple made in Charleston, West Virginia. It's a Yugoslavian fish stew that has a little bit of everything.
Salmon, swordfish, mahi-mahi, catfish. There's always calamari and shrimp and scallops in there too.
And we talk with the poet laureate of Blair County, Pennsylvania, who invented the demi-sonnet.
I like the idea of capturing this moment, the small moment that shows a sort of larger dedication to community and humanity.
You'll hear these stories and more this week inside Appalachia. Welcome inside Appalachia. I'm Mason Adams. In the summer of 1996 in Shenandoah National Park, two women, Julie Williams and Lolly Winans, were murdered not far from the Appalachian Trail. The case remains unsolved today. Journalist Catherine Miles wrote about the murders in her book, Trailed, One Woman's Quest to Solve the Shenandoah Murders. The book goes beyond true crime, though, and wraps in Miles' personal experiences and the specter of violence in the outdoors, a place where people go to find peace and solitude. I spoke with Miles. Warning for listeners, some of this conversation gets into violence, sexual assault, and other difficult topics. It's about 15 minutes long. For people who don't know about the 1996 homicides, can you kind of give us the nuts and bolts of what happened on the Appalachian Trail there? Was it in Shenandoah National Park?
It was in Shenandoah National Park, and it was just off of the Appalachian Trail. So Lolly and Julie were both real just wilderness leaders, and they had met the summer before at a really revolutionary outdoor program called Woods Women. They fell head over heels in love. And I think it's really important to remember that this was 1996. This was a long time before anyone really kind of felt comfortable coming out in a public way, especially somewhere like the upper Midwest, which is where they were located. So they had some challenges in terms of trying to figure out how to navigate this relationship, whether or not they wanted to navigate a same-sex relationship. But they did really sort of both commit to it, and they spent the next calendar year in a long-distance relationship, getting to know each other, trying to figure out sort of how to be in the cultural space that was this time period. At the end of what had been Lolly's last semester of her college experience, so this is May of 1996, the two were living about 5 hours apart. Julie was in Vermont. Lolly was in Maine at Unity, the college that I would go on to teach at. And so the school year had wrapped up. They were both about to embark upon very busy summers. And so they decided that what they really wanted to do was take sort of an easy breezy backpacking trip that would give them time to recommit, reconnect as a couple, kind of take a little bit of a breather before the hectic summer season. And so they picked Shenandoah National Park, knowing that, first of all, the weather was a lot more reliable there than it is here in Maine in May, where, snow is still a possibility. And they also knew that not only did the Appalachian Trail run through the park, but there were also a lot of, other trails and things that would allow them to have an experience where it wasn't really about endurance and it really wasn't about skill so much as it was about recreation. About a week into their trip, we think, 5 to 7 days into their trip, they were brutally assaulted at their backcountry campsite. They were both murdered. We believe that Julie was sexually assaulted. And then that really led to just this sort of impossibly difficult and confusing and convoluted and flawed investigation that continues today.
Yes, the investigation has yet to conclude. And in part, it seems because law enforcement authorities really singled out an individual early on and kind of pursued a case against him, whereas your book suggests maybe they shouldn't have been so quick to rush to prosecution necessarily, or rush to close off other potentialities. Can you talk a little bit about what you found?
Sure. So in 1997, July of 1997, so about 14 months after Lolly and Julie were murdered, a young man named Darrell David Rice was in Shenandoah National Park. His father lived right outside of the park, and he would regularly spend a lot of time cycling there. And he had, by all accounts, including his own, several very severe psychological challenges and issues that he was dealing with, most notably bipolar schizophrenia. So his life in July of 97 had been completely unraveling. He was not getting treatment for these psychological disorders. He was sort of at his wit's end. And in one particular weekend in July, he had been up for 2 or 3 days straight, was very sort of agitated, and was driving through the park, and he saw a female cyclist, and he drove past her several times. He shouted obscenities at her. He threw a soda bottle at her, and at one point, succeeded in running her off the road. She, was understandably terrified about this and got help, and rangers managed to get a hold of him before he left the park. And as soon as they apprehended him, the rangers were convinced that he had murdered Lolly and Julie the summer before. And at that point really shifted all of their investigation onto him. And I should say, just by way of sort of clarifying and contextualizing here, when violent crime occurs in national parks, those investigations are the dual purview of both the FBI and the National Park Service Police. And so those two law enforcement agencies, which do not have a lot in common with each other and have very, I think, different sort of cultural expectations, those two agencies have to come together during these crimes. And I think that's part of what makes these crimes so difficult to successfully solve and close are these culture clashes. But anyway, both the FBI and the Park Service Police immediately began to focus on Darrell David Rice and really began to shift their investigation exclusively to him at that point.
So Darrell Rice was indicted in 2001, but ultimately federal officials couldn't gather enough of a case to really take him to trial. So that was dismissed, I guess. And your investigation kind of points in different directions. Can you talk a little bit about what you learned through your research?
Sure. So in 2001, as you said, Darrell Rice was formally indicted. And at that point, the Attorney General for the U.S. was John Ashcroft under the Bush administration. And he saw in this particular case an opportunity to test out brand new hate crime legislation. So in the indictment, which was a capital indictment, right, a death penalty indictment, it became actually the first official federal hate crime in the United States. And at that point, it also became a hugely political and politically charged case. The FBI at best had, and I wouldn't even call it circumstantial evidence. I don't even think it's that strong. They had one very small and very sort of strange piece of evidence that they thought might link Darrell David Rice to the crime, but they had no forensic evidence, right? No hairs, no DNA, anything else. In fact, the DNA that they had taken from the crime scene had excluded Darrell Rice as a suspect in all of it, but had not excluded another known serial killer who was working in the area. So eventually, faced with this sort of mounting DNA evidence that continued to exclude Darrell Rice, saying that it was sort of, forensically impossible for him to have been connected to any of this evidence that was taken from the crime scene, they had no choice but to dismiss the case against him. But what I should say, and this is very important, is the federal prosecutors used a not very well-known legal concept to dismiss the case, and they dismissed it using a concept called without prejudice. And those are usually used in cases where prosecutors are convinced of the guilt of the defendant. They feel like they do have a strong case, a case that could persuade a jury or a judge, but because of some sort of procedural error that occurred during the trial, they feel like they can't get the conviction that they need to get. And so by dismissing a case in this way, the federal government basically reserves the right to bring the case back against a person at any time. So in the case of Darrell Rice, they were on the eve of jury selection for his trial. at any point, the federal government can go basically right back to that spot, right, and continue the trial against him. So he lives in this state of double jeopardy, which is how and why the Virginia Innocence Project became involved in the case, because they saw this as a miscarriage of justice against an innocent person. And I was very fortunate to work with the Innocence Project, re-examining this case and reinvestigating it from the beginning.
So as you're researching this book and looking into the minutia of this crime, I mean, you describe how Deirdre Enright at the Virginia Innocence Project kind of didn't, like, I wouldn't say she didn't take you seriously, but she took you seriously once she realized like how much reading you'd actually done. You weren't moonlighting on this. This was a serious pursuit. So you're getting pretty deep into this research. I would imagine that stands in direct conflict with your view of wilderness and nature, which is kind of like mine is, which is it's a place for escape. It's a place where you go to get away from all of society's troubles and our personal troubles. How were you working on this? What was that journey like for you?
Really difficult. As I say in the book, I had started my tenure at Unity College in the fall of 2001. So literally 2 days before September 11th, I was barely 27 years old. It was my first college teaching job. And, Unity is a very tight-knit community, and it's a tight-knit community of wilderness lovers. So, we would have classes outside, we would have classes on the trail, or, that was just sort of a part of our sort of culture there. And so it was the spring of 2002 when the formal announcement of this indictment took place. And I saw firsthand how that indictment really impacted the Unity community. Lolly at that point had been dead for 5 years, but she was still very, very present on that campus. She was just such an extraordinary leader and an extraordinary human that, my colleagues were her faculty members and professors, and her friends had become my friends. And so, seeing the residual trauma, not only of her very untimely death, but also how this indictment brought up all of that again, had made the case sort of doubly personally for me. So not only did I really sort of identify with Lolly and Julie in some very profound ways, and felt that impact as sort of a secondary trauma as a female sexual assault survivor, backpacker, but then, to see firsthand how this was impacting people who I had already grown to love, really, really made this very real for me. So when I set out on the 20th anniversary to begin working on this as a magazine article, already, the stakes were pretty high for me, and the emotions were pretty high. And one of the things that I try to acknowledge at the start in the book is that I'm very aware that influences and affects and probably hampers my ability to be wholly objective in all of this, because it does really feel like a personal story in some profound ways for me.
Yeah, it reads like a personal story as much as a true crime book. The book goes a lot of places. It gets into issues involving our public lands. It gets into societal attitudes towards the LGBT community and how they've changed. It gets into systemic issues with law enforcement and investigation. And it gets into your own personal journey. You worked on this for years and you've been promoting it for months. At this remove, what are kind of your biggest takeaways at this point?
I think what was the biggest education for me in all of this was understanding multiple sort of shortcomings or things that really need to be corrected in our judicial system. I talk in the book about this concept of confirmation bias, which we all suffer from. As soon as we believe something is true, we funnel every perception, every idea, every fact through that belief. And I think that's really what happened in the case of these investigators and Darrell Rice. It's not a surprise. And I'm not spoiling anything in the book to say that I really do believe he is innocent. And I do believe that there's another person who I name in the book who is in fact the murderer. So, understanding just how often this happens, there's something like 250,000 cold murder cases in our country right now. Those are cases that not only have they not been solved, but they're not being actively investigated anymore. Understanding the way in which our country has kind of fallen short with forensic analysis, especially, people might be familiar with hearing stories about, these huge backlogs of rape kits that have never been tested. And then also, frankly, and this was, again, very sort of profoundly eye-opening for me, is the number of people incarcerated who in fact are innocent and are in the process of being exonerated, and understanding that, for me, I think I really wanted to believe that the judicial system always works, right? And it's objective and it's progressive, and it logically comes to a conclusion that can absolutely be defended. And understanding now and seeing now how many people are in fact being exonerated, how many people have been wrongly imprisoned, has really sort of shaken my sense, not only of, safety in the wilderness, which this project kind of shook, but also I think some of my confidence in the American judicial system.
Yeah, I've heard it referred to as the CSI fallacy or Law and Order fallacy, depending on who you're talking to, that everything just sort of wraps up nice and neat. And that's very much not the case in a lot of cases.
Yeah, we want it to be, right? And we want there to be that smoking gun, or we want there to be that one piece of DNA that absolutely proves it. But that's so rarely the case, unfortunately. And I think that's a very bitter pill for surviving family members and friends to swallow when they sort of watch these cases kind of languish and go unsolved.
Well, Catherine Miles, thank you so much for coming on and speaking with us at Inside Appalachia.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for giving some light and attention to this very important case.
That was journalist Catherine Miles. Her book is Trailed: One Woman's Quest to Solve the Shenandoah Murders. Coming up, we hear about a savory seafood soup made in Charleston, West Virginia that's so good you can almost taste it.
It's spicy. It's got every kind of seafood, scallops and shrimp, and it's just very tasty, and it's very filling, actually.
You're Inside Appalachia. I'm Mason Adams.
Support for Inside Appalachia is provided by Concord University, focusing on students' futures. Classes available at concord.edu/apply.
If you're in Charleston, West Virginia, General Steak and Seafood is the place to get fresh seafood. Trucks arrive daily with salmon fillets, swordfish, Chilean sea bass, scallops, Chesapeake Bay oysters, and more. And if you want to taste a little of everything in a single dish, pick up a quart of the shop's Yugoslavian fish stew. Locally, it's achieved an almost legendary status, but it didn't start out that way. Folkways reporter Zach Harold has the story.
It's lunchtime on the first Friday of Lent, that season when many Christians abstain from mammal meat. So you can imagine how busy it's getting at General Steak and Seafood in downtown Charleston, West Virginia.
Give me about 6 of the smaller.
Folks are stopping by to get shrimp, salmon, and cod, but nothing is selling faster than the Yugoslavian stew. Yugo stew, if you're a regular. The shop opened at 10 a.m. with about 7 gallons on hand, and now they only have a few quarts left.
It's very good.
Philip Michael got one of the last containers. He says he's been eating this stuff for about 20 years now.
It's spicy. It's got every kind of seafood, scallops and shrimp, and it's just very tasty, and it's very filling, actually.
The shop's been getting calls from the time they open from customers like Philip, hoping to reserve a few containers.
Sometimes they might be having company and they might want 3 quarts or 4 quarts or more. Some people buy 5 or 6 pints and take them to the office and give everybody one.
That's Robin Harmon. He's one of the founders of General Steak and Seafood.
It sells out every day.
And it's been this way for over 40 years, back before this current market existed, back when there was still a country called Yugoslavia. Robin and his brother Joe owned a combined restaurant and market a few streets over, as well as a bustling catering business. And even back then, the Harmon brothers were known for having the freshest seafood in town. But they had a problem. In those days, scallops didn't come neatly wrapped and packed on refrigerated trucks. They were air freighted in 40-pound sacks. That led to a lot of broken pieces, perfectly edible, but not pretty enough to sell to customers. The operation was also peeling 100 pounds of shrimp a day between all of the businesses, and inevitably, some of them looked a little worse for wear.
And then everybody wants 6 and 8 ounce center cut pieces of fish, so we have all kinds of end pieces and trimmings.
So they had all this perfectly good stuff, too delicious and expensive to throw away. They just didn't have anything to do with it. Then one day they found the solution in a copy of the newly launched Cook's Illustrated magazine. It was a recipe for Dalmatian stew, a recipe from the coastal region of Croatia, then part of Yugoslavia, where a lot of the local diet comes from the ocean.
So it was actually a catch-all stew to use a lot of local marine life there, but I modified it for restaurant use because I wanted everything to be bite-sized and nothing in the shell so that you didn't have to take things out of the shell or peel shrimp and all that kind of stuff. So
Robin made some other changes too. He added some extra spices and a lot of hot sauce. But perhaps most important, he changed the name.
But when you spelled it out, it looked like Dalmatian, so I didn't want the dog thing with it.
But Dalmatian stew, by any other name, tastes just as delicious. Though the fish is always fresh, Robin usually makes the soup base a day or two ahead. He starts by speed chopping 5 onions and throwing them into a pot that's coated with warm, shimmering olive oil.
Yeah, it looks like I've done it before, doesn't it?
In go several stalks of celery, also rough chopped, and 2 whole heads of garlic, finely minced. Then come the spices.
That's about, volume-wise, about 8 ounces of dry parsley.
He also adds oregano, basil, and 3 kinds of pepper, black, white, and red. He measured them out today because a guy with a radio microphone just happened to be hanging around, but usually he just does it by feel.
No, I have ways like when I do the basil and the oregano, I just turn the thing up and I do 10 big pinches.
Now he adds some chicken stock and lets the mixture bubble away for a little bit, allowing the flavors to condense. After that, it's several gigantic cans of diced tomatoes and tomato sauce, granulated garlic, sugar, and 3 kinds of hot sauce.
3 kinds of pepper, 3 kinds of hot sauce. Nice little dose of Tabasco, nice little dose of Red Hot. Lastly, sriracha.
Sriracha was actually a pretty exotic ingredient back when Robin first started making this stew in the early 80s. His shop was probably the first place in Charleston to sell it.
Yeah, we bought it out of Cleveland. Before you could find it in a grocery store or anything, we sold it over there on Broad Street.
And with that, we're done.
That is now this.
Robin now has the base for tomorrow's Yugo stew. Tomorrow morning, he'll heat it up and add the fish. That's the only part of the recipe that changes from day to day. It really just depends on what comes across the shop's cutting boards.
Salmon, swordfish, mahi-mahi, catfish. There's always calamari and shrimp and scallops in there too.
Most of the fish goes in about 10 minutes before the soup is ready to serve. Doesn't take long to cook. The shrimp takes even less time, going in the pot for just a couple minutes, which is great because by that point, people are usually lining up for their containers of Yugo stew. Denise Workman is a substitute teacher at a nearby elementary school. She hopped over on her lunch break.
Well, I mean, it's spicy and delicious, filled with seafood. I have the recipe that was in the paper a few years ago that they shared, but I've never tried to make it, but you can't top this.
But Kim Brown, who entered the store just a few minutes after Denise, wasn't so lucky.
Oh, darn it. I knew I was probably too late. Back tomorrow. Okay, thank you.
Seems like everybody in town has a hankering for this stuff, except for one person.
I just got to where I couldn't. My brother still eats it. The other people who work here still eat it, but they don't make it every day like I do. It's the first thing I do every day when I get here is put that on the stove. I haven't eaten it in years.
You know what? That's just more for the rest of us. In Charleston, West Virginia, I'm Zach Harold for Inside Appalachia.
That story is part of our Folkways reporting project, which covers arts and culture in the region. To see and hear more of our Folkways stories, visit our website, wvpublic.org. We continue to learn more about a recent train derailment in East Palestine, Ohio. That wreck has ignited conversations across the country about train safety rules. The people in East Palestine have a more immediate need. They just want to know if it's safe for them to stay in their homes. Some residents are looking to outside researchers for help. Kara Holsopple with the Allegheny Front brings us this story.
Emily Wright lives in Columbiana County and is the development director for River Valley Organizing, which is based in East Liverpool, Ohio. The group is trying to coordinate independent soil and water testing and is in touch with researchers at the universities of Pittsburgh and Kentucky. Wright says though the U.S. EPA says its monitoring indicates the air there is safe to breathe, she has other concerns since the fires and smoke have dissipated.
When the dust settles, the air quality, of course, isn't going to be still affected. But they let people back in their homes before they did completed soil and water testing. People's homes still have all of the contaminants on the surfaces. So when you sit on the couch and, they go up in the air, when you dust. So our major concern is that, and residents are reporting to us and on the East Palestine Talk page, like the Facebook pages, they're showing that they're waking up with rashes. They're having respiratory symptoms that are worsening.
Why does your group think independent testing is necessary in East Palestine?
As we're nonpartisan, nonprofit, we're finding that a lot of the programs, depending on what administration they're under, totally change with that. The EPA is one of them. I don't care what any politician says or what letters behind their name, all of them have failed. And we keep hearing the railroad had safety regulations that were loosened under the Trump administration. Well, we've been under a new administration for 2 years and they're still loosened. As someone that, like my father has bilateral asbestosis from working at Weirton Steel. I have family members with multiple myeloma after working a nuclear power plant. And my family has literally given our lives to these industries. We work in these industries. We live by these industries. We get it. We're all for commerce, but what we're not for anymore is our bodies in Appalachia and in these areas being used for the commerce of the United States. This is why independent testing needs to be done, and this is why existing institutions need to be checked. And we're not against government and we're not against the EPA. We just want them to do their job and actually serve the people.
Is it that you don't trust the EPA's and Ohio EPA's test results, or is this like additional testing?
I think it's more additional testing. It's not it's not that they think that the EPA's test results are bad. It's that, are they testing for everything they should? And did they test for everything they should before they let people in their homes? And the answer is no. So the trust is broken. So our concern is that if people don't see some independent testing done and other people coming in, it will spread further misinformation. It will cause hysteria where it doesn't need to be. We're actually trying to do the opposite of that right now.
And you're focusing on soil and water testing.
Yes, our focus with soil and water is really important, especially in the long term. East Palestine, I don't know if you know about northern Columbiana County in general, but we're mostly farming communities and small businesses. So we're surrounded by farms. We're trying to make sure that focus isn't lost for the community. Maybe the media calms down on this and people forget about East Palestine because they're not from here. In Pennsylvania and Darlington, where they were affected, and we want to be here.
Emily Wright is the development director for River Valley Organizing, which is trying to coordinate independent soil and water testing in East Palestine. There's more on the train derailment at AlleghenyFront.org. I'm Kara Holsopple.
The toxic chemical spill in East Palestine, Ohio, wasn't the first time pollutants have made their way into Appalachia's air, soil, and water. Lately, we've been hearing about a group of chemicals known as PFAS, that some people call forever chemicals. They seem to be turning up everywhere, including West Virginia. Shepard Snyder has more.
PFAS are a group of around 10,000 man-made chemicals that have been used to manufacture both industrial and consumer products for around 80 years. More commonly known as forever chemicals, they're known to cause health problems like liver damage, higher cholesterol, cancer, and a weakened immune system, among others. Most famously, PFAS chemicals have been used to create industrial-grade firefighting foam, and have been used by companies like Chemours and DuPont to create Teflon. But they're also found in products like food packaging and water-resistant jackets.
These products end up in landfills, many of them, and the landfills can have leachate that get into the ground.
That was Jenna Dodson, staff scientist at the West Virginia Rivers Coalition. She was among the panelists at a public conference addressing PFAS earlier this month in Shepherdstown, located in the Eastern Panhandle. Levels of PFAS chemicals above the federal EPA's health advisories have been found in 130 raw water supplies statewide, with the state's Departments of Environmental Protection and Health and Human Resources currently testing the state's treated water systems as well. In 2019, the CDC reported that state residents living near the Shepherd Field Air National Guard Base in Martinsburg had blood concentrations of PFAS higher than the national average. Bases like that use the PFAS firefighting foam, and it's believed the chemicals contaminated much of the local waterways. High levels of the chemicals were found in Martinsburg's Big Springs water filtration plant in 2016.
They're in our waterways, it's in our soil, it's in our air because it also travels via air deposition, and so that's why they're so ubiquitous. And again, localized contamination can occur.
In the region alone, there are 36 raw water supplies that have been identified as having unsafe amounts of the chemicals. That area, along with the Ohio River Valley, are considered PFAS hot zones in West Virginia, though they've been found in water supplies statewide. Dodson was joined by Brent Walls of the Potomac Riverkeeper Network. He's studying PFAS effects on the Potomac River's aquatic ecosystem by surveying small-range fish species in the area. He discovered some fish in the nearby Antietam Creek in Maryland had elevated amounts of the chemicals in their tissue.
That was extremely alarming because smallmouth bass is a popular recreational fish species, not only for catch and release, but also for families and communities to take home to eat.
Health advisory guidelines released by the EPA in 2022 say anything above 0.004 parts per trillion for PFOA or 0.02 parts per trillion for PFOS are considered unsafe. PFOA and PFOS are two common PFAS subgroups.
That would be 1 drop of PFOS in 20 Olympic-sized pools. That's the kind of, visualization of how small of an amount of this pollutant has an impact.
Walls is worried state and local agencies wouldn't be able to properly measure and treat PFAS because of how little amounts are needed to infiltrate waterways to contaminate them.
Those tests are expensive. And even if the facilities are able to find a lab to provide the analysis, then they have to find the resources to address the situation.
That's a concern echoed by John Bresland, one of the local citizens in attendance at the Shepherdstown conference Walls and Dodson spoke at. He's also a member of the town's water board.
I know that the current wastewater plant that we have will not be able to remove PFAS, so we need to get some guidance from EPA as to how do we if and when the time comes.
Others in attendance, like David Lillard, were concerned about both his health as well as the health of the local environment.
We're a headwater state. Water that flows from our mountains is not only our drinking water, it is a drinking water for people in the Ohio Valley and in the Potomac River Basin. It's 5 million people just in the Washington, D.C. area.
In the state legislature, bills have been introduced in both the House and Senate that would require the State Department of Environmental Protection to create an action plan to address PFAS chemicals, have state manufacturing facilities monitor and self-report PFAS discharge, and would enforce a limit on said discharges statewide. For West Virginia Public Broadcasting, I'm Shepard Snyder in Martinsburg.
For someone with dementia or for their family, the possibility of getting confused while out and about can be pretty worrisome. Fortunately, more communities are beginning to respond. St. Albans, West Virginia, was recently recognized for offering services and support for people with dementia and Alzheimer's disease. The town recently held a dementia-friendly day to spotlight the new designation. As part of his series on elder care, WVPB's Eric Douglas spoke with St. Albans Vice Mayor Walter Hall.
What does that mean? What is a dementia-friendly city?
So the dementia-friendly means that we reach out to our community partners. Our community partners in any community are our churches, our nonprofits, our grocery stores, our police, our fire, our city employees, public works. So to become dementia-friendly, we developed a plan of educating our community on becoming dementia-friendly. First experience we had was at the Hansford Senior Center, and it was called a hands-on experience. And we invited the general public, and we had some professionals there to speak about. Neurologists spoke. We had doctors, nurses, hospice, Alzheimer's, and we had a hands-on experience. And we had close to 100 folks from the community show up for that event.
Let's talk about that training for businesses, though. You go into this first business, and you're teaching the employees, if somebody comes in who's agitated or doesn't make sense, whatever, this might be dementia. What are they supposed to do? How do they react to that?
We as an employee, they are to recognize the signs of dementia. And we have the pamphlets and the brochures in the restaurant to recognize the top 10 signs of dementia. And to do that as an employee is to be more patient, be more understanding, and develop an eye contact with the caregiver. And we have these cards, and then there are dementia-friendly St. Albans with our logo, and on the back of it, please be patient, for my loved one is suffering from dementia. They may repeat their questions. Please be patient. And that's on the back of the business card. So the caregivers come into a dementia-friendly trained business, and when the employee comes up, the first thing they are to do as a caregiver is to hand that card to the employee so that you don't mention it or discuss it in front of them, because our parents, our loved ones can hear.
Sure.
They have some understanding of what you're saying and can become quite agitated. Just hand them a little business card. Now there's a whole different level of understanding in that.
But you're talking about a caregiver takes a loved one out to dinner.
Yes.
Get them out of the house, get
Absolutely.
some fresh air.
It's important to interact with other humans.
Sure. Absolutely.
It's our nature.
And so they walk into this restaurant, and just casually the caregiver hands a business card to the waiter or waitress, to the staff. And that gives them a heads up. Hey, this person has dementia. I need to treat them a little differently.
Now every city employee, police, fire, public works, our water and sewer, all of these folks have been trained on how to identify the signs or understand what's going on with one, that it's not drugs or it's not a mental health issue. We have restaurants calling us every day now wanting to sign up for this.
Fantastic.
And we have a crew now that can go and perform this training.
Yeah, it's all about education.
It's educating our community, shops, restaurants, markets, our streets, on our neighbors, or everyone. And 6 years, we have a nice following and a nice group. We all help ourselves. We have to look out for one another. And by nature, we as humans have to interact with others. And we invite you to encourage you to bring your mom and dad on out. Bring your grandpa, grandma, bring them on out. Go to these 13, 14 businesses. They understand what's going on. Make your reservation.
So, I mean, and I think you told me before, at the time, at least, that you started, there was only one other city, and that was in Minnesota, maybe?
Yes, it was in, I wish I could remember the town, but yeah, there was one city, one community in Minnesota that had gone through the dementia-friendly training. There's a Dementia-Friendly America that has their own set of rules, and then we have the Alzheimer's Association has their own set.
Okay. Well, I guess
guidelines, I should say, not rules, or guidelines of what to follow to become a dementia-friendly community, and we got the support of both organizations, and we're now recognized as dementia-friendly community and stamped and approved by each organization.
That was Walter Hall speaking with Eric Douglas about Dementia Friendly Day in St. Albans. It's part of WVPB's series, Getting into Their Reality, Caring for Aging Parents. To read more and to check out the rest of the series, visit wvpublic.org.
I see the sunrise creeping in. Everything changes like the desert wind. Here she comes and then she's gone again. And I'm just a traveler on this earth. Showing my heart behind the pocket of my...
Erin Murphy is coming up on the anniversary of her first year as the Poet Laureate of Blair County, Pennsylvania. Murphy is the author of 10 poetry collections, the editor of 3 anthologies, and the inventor of the demi-sonnet. Producer Bill Lynch talked with Murphy about inventing a new form and finding poetry in the daily news.
I was thinking a good poem to start with is a poem that is set in Appalachia, as we say in the northern part of Appalachia, although as a kid I lived in Appalachia in the southern part. But yeah, I have a poem called Illuminated, which is about the supermoon that you may remember from April of 2021. Here's a poem about that. Illuminated. The night of the closest supermoon in 70 years, I scrolled through Facebook posts of my friends' photos. Peter's was best. The moon floated like an illuminated balloon above a red barn in roaring spring. I'm ashamed to say how long it took me to look outside at the real thing.
It's lovely.
Thanks. So yeah, that ties into that idea of technology dominating our lives so much that sometimes we forget, that there's a real world out there.
Right. I'm going to get to this thing first because it's the thing that jumped out to me when I was doing a little bit of research. I've spoken to all sorts of people over the years. I've talked to rock stars. I've talked to politicians and plumbers. I've never spoken to anyone who's invented a new part of language, right? So maybe you could explain about the demi-sonnet and how you invented such a thing.
Most of your listeners probably know that a sonnet, a traditional sonnet, has 14 lines. So I developed a form that I call a demi-sonnet. It's half of a sonnet, so it's 7 lines. And other than that, what the form has is it's sort of a sparseness to it. Narrative is pared down to kind of the most essential elements. And then it ends in a near rhyme or a slant rhyme, or it could be a full rhyme. So when we think of rhymes, we tend to think like cat and hat, right? But sometimes there's more of a slant rhyme there. I'll share a demi-sonnet with you, and you can listen for that kind of near rhyme, the almost rhyme of the poem. This also takes place in a small town in Appalachia. I live just south of Altoona, Pennsylvania, and this poem is called Small Town. My neighbor returns from this week's chemo. Her friend, a local judge, pedals up on a 3-speed. She's here to administer a foot massage. I don't want much. To live in a town where people ride bikes with baskets, a place where people show up, take your beleaguered feet in their hands and rub. So I like the idea of capturing this moment, the small moment that shows a sort of larger dedication to community and humanity. The near rhyme there would be the up and rub. So we don't tend to think of those as rhyming, but the words do suggest each other. So in my demi-sonnets, they end with a fuller and near rhyme, or sometimes called a slant rhyme. And the way it came about, to get back to your question, is a lot of times poets go and do, writers in general, do these residencies where you can go away for sometimes months at a time to just focus on your own writing, which is a wonderful experience. I've had that experience before. It's great. When my children were younger, it was hard to get away for long stretches of time like that. So I said to my husband one spring semester, as our semester was ending, I said, I want a DIY residency, and I just want to be at home, but I want to be able to wake up in the morning and focus on my writing for, several hours without interruption. So you get to get the kids off to school, handle all their questions about, what am I taking for lunch? Where's my library book? You have to sign my permission slip, all of that. So I thought, I'll do that for a week, maybe 2 weeks. Well, the 2 weeks turned into 4 weeks, turned into 6 weeks. And I was waking up every morning between, 5:30, 6 a.m. And I would work until noon, 1 o'clock every day without interruption. And during that period, I developed this very compressed form. I thought, maybe it'll be, a small series, maybe a dozen poems or so. Well, the next thing I knew, I had written 120 of them and really started dreaming in them. Like everything became like potential material for this form. I put them away for 6 months, stuck them in a drawer because I thought, sometimes you don't know when you've first written something if it's, even worth salvaging. And I opened it back up 6 months later, took a look, and I thought, these are actually pretty good. And I pared it down to about 80 of them. And that became my first collection of demi-sonnets.
You're a poet laureate. Becoming a poet laureate kind of suggests a journey. So this is the part where you get a chance to tell me your life story in a compacted form.
Yeah, once upon a time. So my life story. So I'm a poet laureate of Blair County, Pennsylvania, which is a terrific honor. Born in New England, grew up mostly in Richmond, Virginia, for a spell. Lived outside of Asheville, North Carolina. And I've been living in central/western Pennsylvania for the past 18 years. So I started writing as a kid. My mom cleaned out her attic recently and found some really brilliant stories I wrote in second grade, including one about a horse playing the piano. It's really great. I also had this stretch in fifth grade where I was really into race car drivers. And so I read everything I could read about Indy race car driving and wrote a lot of poems about that. I don't have any of this memorized. But since that time, most of the poems I write have to do, some are, sort of personal, memoir type narrative, but also usually a lot of awareness of writing itself. And I try to have close attention to language.
Something I was reading about you, it says that you worked in news for a part of your life. That's interesting to me because news writers, feature writers, sports writers are often reaching for the poetic, right? So they don't always get there, right? But poets reaching for news, is that something that you give a shot at?
Yes, I love incorporating current events into my work. I have a poem that was published just the other day that has to do with the earthquakes in Turkey and Syria. So I really like to respond to what's happening in the world, as it's happening. That's a big source of inspiration for me. Working as a news editor in itself required some poetry. I mean, what is a headline but poetry, right? You're trying to capture the entire story in as few words as possible. And we used to, when I was news editor of the local daily paper in Maryland, we used to win all kinds of contests for our headline writing. If you want to win headline contests, hire a poet.
Artists leave legacies. Do you have a particular poem that you're remembered for?
That is such an interesting question. Well, I have a poem that won the Rattle Poetry Prize Reader's Choice Award this past year. And I always say I read that whenever I get the chance because it's a single poem, but it won a $5,000 prize. And what's nice about Rattle is that when they let you know if you've won this prize, they also include a lot of the commentary that people wrote about the poem. And so that's really rewarding to know that it had that impact on people. So I'll read you that poem if you want. It's called the Internet of Things. And for those who don't know, the Internet of Things is the networking capability that allows information to be sent and received by objects and devices. It's the way all of our gadgets talk to each other, basically. So millions and millions of devices are communicating with each other all of the time. So this is called the Internet of Things. It's basically an economics term. The low tide riverbed silt of things. The cloud-swept distant hill of things, the open bedroom window in spring of things, the moonlit cricket symphony of things, the pitter-patter tin roof rain of things, the 50-year marriage loose skin of things, the clipped winter light of things, the stippled lymph node of things, the grief. Oh, the grief, the brief, ecstatic flight of things. So I guess if I had to pick a poem that I would like to be remembered for, at least as of today, I would say that poem, The Internet of Things, subject to change.
Erin, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for chatting with me, Bill.
That was Erin Murphy, Poet Laureate of Blair County, Pennsylvania. We're always looking for new writers with something interesting to say. Do you have a favorite Appalachian poet? Tell us about them. Write us at insideappalachia@wvpublic.org.
Left alone sinks like a stone, and it rests on the floor of a sea in a storm, and it's lost deep enough. Winds rage above. I can feel the waves come down, crashing over me. I can feel the cold and dark at the bottom of the sea.
Till next time, thanks for joining us as we journey throughout Appalachia. Our theme music is by Matt Jackford. Other music this week was provided by Mary Hott, David Mayfield, Tyler Childers, Chris Stapleton, Sierra Farrell, and Lucero. Bill Lynch is our producer. Our executive producer is Eric Douglas. Kelly Libby is our editor. Our audio mixer is Patrick Stevens. Xander Alloy also helped produce this episode. You can find us on Instagram and Twitter @InAppalachia. You can also send us an email to insideappalachia@wvpublic.org. Visit wvpublic.org/InsideAppalachia to subscribe or stream all of our stories. Or look for Inside Appalachia on your favorite podcast app. Inside Appalachia is a production of West Virginia Public Broadcasting.
Support for Inside Appalachia is provided by Concord University, offering 31 bachelor-level degrees and 6 master-level degrees for students of any age. More information at concord.edu.